Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. Today I will tell you about a case that has shocked not only a family, but the entire British community. It is the story of a teenager, Daniel Bartlam, who has turned his darkest fantasies into reality. How is it possible that a seemingly normal boy turns into a ruthless killer? Let's find out together. Daniel Bartlam was born in 1996 in Nottingham, UK. At first glance, he seems like a teenager like many others, an introverted boy who loves television and video games. However, Daniel hides a dark side. From an early age, he shows a morbid interest in stories of crime, murder, and serial killers. After his parents' divorce, Daniel moves in with his mother, Jacqueline, and his younger brother. The separation leaves deep marks on his psyche. He becomes more reserved and begins to develop a real obsession with the television series Coronation Street, in particular with the character of John Stape, a fictional murderer. Daniel is no ordinary teenager. At just 14, he begins writing disturbing stories in which he imagines killing people, including his mother. His writings become increasingly detailed and violent, a clear manifestation of his mental deterioration. But it doesn't stop at writing. Daniel begins to actually plan a murder. He buys a hammer and carefully studies every detail. His obsession with John Stape leads him to believe that he can replicate in real life what he has seen on television. It is the night of April 25, 2011. Jacqueline, unaware of her son's dark thoughts, is at home with him. Daniel, armed with the hammer he had purchased, repeatedly strikes his mother as she sleeps, inflicting fatal wounds. But the brutality does not end there. To cover his tracks, Daniel sets the house on fire, hoping to pass off the murder as a tragic domestic accident. However, he makes a fatal mistake. He leaves the bloody hammer next to his mother's body. The fire immediately attracts the attention of neighbors and authorities. The firefighters, once they put out the fire, find Jacqueline's body and begin to suspect that it was not an accident. The police question Daniel, who initially tries to lie. He says that an intruder broke into the house and killed his mother, but the evidence tells a different story. Daniel's fingerprints on the hammer and his internet searches incriminate him. During a search, investigators find Daniel's written stories and videos saved on his computer, which clearly prove his premeditation. The trial of Daniel Bartlam takes place in 2012. Despite his young age, Daniel is tried as an adult. During the trial, his deep psychological disorder and his desire to emulate the character of John Stape emerge. Experts describe Daniel as a highly manipulative boy with psychopathic tendencies. The court sentences him to a minimum of 16 years in prison for murder. What drove Daniel Bartlam to commit such a brutal act? Experts point out several factors: the presence of a latent psychological disorder. In fact, Daniel shows signs of narcissism and lack of empathy. The influence of the media, his obsession with violence shown on television certainly contributed. Family trauma, his parents' divorce may have amplified his emotional distress. But let's look at Daniel's psychological profile. Daniel Bartlam was a 14-year-old teenager who at first glance seemed like an ordinary boy. He attended school, loved video games, and watched a lot of television. But behind this facade hid a dark side. From an early age, Daniel showed signs of psychological distress. After his parents' divorce, which occurred when he was still a child, his behavior changed drastically. Daniel became increasingly introverted, isolating himself from the rest of the world. One of the most disturbing aspects of his personality was his obsession with the television series Coronation Street, in particular with the character of John Stape, a murderer who killed his victims and tried to cover up his crimes. Daniel didn't just watch the show, he tried to emulate that character in real life. Psychology experts who analyzed the case of Daniel Bartlam highlighted several distinctive traits of his personality. First of all, a narcissistic personality disorder. Daniel showed a grandiose vision of himself and believed himself to be special. In his written stories, he imagined himself as a superior character, above moral and social rules. Lack of empathy, a common trait in cases of adolescent crime is the inability to feel empathy for the victims. Daniel showed no remorse for what he had done. On the contrary, he seemed pleased with his actions. Influence of the media. His obsession with violent television characters, such as John Stape, shows how Daniel looked for behavioral models in popular culture. It is not uncommon for individuals with psychopathic traits to find inspiration in figures that represent rebellion and power. Premeditated behavior. One of the most alarming aspects of the case is the meticulous planning of the crime. Daniel did not act on impulse. He purchased a hammer and wrote detailed accounts describing his plan to kill his mother. After making sure his brother was in another room, Daniel entered his mother's room armed with a hammer. He repeatedly struck her in the head, inflicting fatal injuries. However, investigators soon discovered inconsistencies in his story. During a search, they found Daniel's written accounts, in which he described the murder in great detail. In addition, research on methods of committing murder and concealing evidence was found on his computer. Let's now look in detail at the stages of the judicial process. During the trial, the defense tried to argue that Daniel suffered from psychological problems and that he was not fully aware of his actions. However, the court considered that the planning of the crime clearly demonstrated his ability to distinguish right from wrong. Hence the sentence in which Daniel was found guilty of murder and sentenced to prison. Despite the young age of the accused, the seriousness of the crime prompted the court to try him as an adult. This was one of the first points of contention. Daniel was only 14 years old at the time of the crime, but the prosecution stressed that the crime had been planned with such coldness as to exclude any possibility of a more lenient judgment. The prosecution, led by prosecutor Andrew Jackson, presented a disturbing picture of the crime. It highlighted how Daniel had meticulously planned his mother's murder, buying a hammer and writing stories detailing an almost identical murder. One of the prosecution's main arguments was premeditation. Daniel had not acted in a moment of anger or desperation, but had developed a precise plan, including burning down the house to destroy evidence. In addition, the prosecution introduced damning digital evidence. Disturbing stories and research on how to kill someone without leaving a trace were found on Daniel's computer. This clearly demonstrated the teenager's premeditated intent. Daniel's defense, led by his lawyer, tried to tone down the case, arguing that he suffered from serious psychological problems. The defense strategy was based on two main points: mental disorders and emotional difficulties. The defense presented a diagnosis of psychological disorders, suggesting that Daniel was incapable of fully understanding the consequences of his actions. The trauma he suffered during his parents' divorce and his obsession with violent TV characters such as John Stape from Coronation Street were highlighted. Media influence. The defense argued that Daniel had been deeply influenced by what he saw on television and online. His obsession with violent crimes had clouded his judgment and fueled his darkest fantasies. However, these arguments were not enough to convince the jury that Daniel was not responsible for his actions. During the trial, key testimonies were presented that played a crucial role in Daniel's conviction. Several neighbors reported hearing arguments between Daniel and his mother in the days leading up to the murder, suggesting an escalation of family tensions. Expert witnesses confirmed that the hammer found next to his mother's body matched the murder weapon and that the wounds were consistent with a premeditated attack. Forensic psychologists confirmed that, despite his mental disorders, Daniel was fully aware of his actions and the consequences. After weeks of testimony and debate, the jury found Daniel Bartlam guilty of premeditated murder. The judge, in sentencing, described the crime as an act of brutal and deliberate violence. He stressed that the defendant's age could not be used as an excuse, given the clear planning and lack of remorse Daniel showed during the trial. Daniel was sentenced to a minimum of 16 years in prison, with the possibility of review upon reaching adulthood. The verdict has attracted mixed reactions. While many applauded the severity of the sentence, others raised questions about the effectiveness of the justice system in dealing with youth crimes. Jacqueline's relatives expressed relief at the sentence, while stressing that nothing could bring their loved one back. The case has fueled debates about the influence of violent media on young people and the importance of monitoring the psychological behavior of adolescents. The case of Daniel Bartlam has sparked a heated debate about the influence of the media on the minds of young people. Can a television program transform a teenager into a murderer? Or is it simply a catalyst for something that already existed inside him? The case of Daniel Bartlam reminds us how complex and unpredictable the human mind can be, especially that of a teenager. It is a tragic story that invites us to reflect on the importance of recognizing the signs of psychological distress before it is too late. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a comment and subscribe to the channel for more crime and trial insights. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.